In 1939, ours was the only house, I think, in the village that had got electricity and running water. We'd got them because there were a lot of cows on our farm, and the army decided that this was the best farm for an army camp. The war started on September the 3rd against Germany, and on September the 4th there was a whole convoy of army lorries turned up in the farmyard. They'd come all the way from London. They were the Middlesex Territorial Army. There was quite, I should think there were 20 lorries. Their plans was to have the headquarters on the farm. They'd all got searchlights. They hadn't got anti-aircraft guns, but they'd got machine guns to shoot down low-flying German aircraft. That was the plan. I don't think they ever shot any planes down. The reason I'm telling you all this was because in 1942, some civil servants turned up and said, "We're going to build an American airfield on your farm."
They started building in 1942, and the aeroplanes didn't start to come in until 43, so that really it was only a year. But it might have been a little year because the planes came in before they'd actually finished the whole aerodrome.
And we all thought, oh, good gracious me, the war will be ended in a fortnight or 6 weeks or something like that. But as it progressed, we then began to realise how different it was.
The Army and the Air Force both subjected to there being an airfield in Oakley. So they changed the plans. They still built all the army camps for the American Air Force in Brome. Headquarters was there. All the washing facilities were there.
There was so much mud when they were building. It was unbelievable because we used to come up and watch them, and you just had so much trouble to get near anything because the mud was really, really deep. And because they'd got these big bulldozers that you'd never ever seen, and they were huge. And because we were little, you see. And the machinery they had was unbelievable. You just could not understand. You can't comprehend how we felt as youngsters at the machinery that they had.
Within a fortnight, actually, Horham Aerodrome became operational. And there were American troops from Horham turned up to put all the tents up.
There were so many bases that in this part of England that I always describe it to people as East Anglia was a aircraft carrier for the 8th Air Force, except instead of having planes, they had bomb groups. I was 20 years old when I arrived in England with a crew that I trained with in the United States for, I think, maybe 10 weeks. And before that, I had gone through pilot training, which included pre-flight, and then primary, and then basic, and then advanced, and then 4-engine for the B-17s, and then trained with the crew, and then was sent to Kearney, Nebraska to pick up a plane. And eventually we came to the air base and were assigned to the 849th Squadron and began flying missions. The first memory I have was someone coming up to the plane and saying, "Do you have any whiskey?" And we had a case because we were told that American whiskey was in great demand. But as a group of, at the age of 20, I was one of the youngest on the crew. The oldest was probably 23, 24 maybe. you know, and none of us really drank. But we chipped in and bought a case of whiskey. And he offered us $15 a bottle that we just paid $3 a bottle for. And we thought we would hold on to it because that was only the first offer. We never got an offer that good again. And in the beginning, each member of the crew flew one mission with an experienced crew. And after that, we flew as a crew, as a unit. When I trained, and other people trained to learn how to fly in the United States, they sent me to California, where the sun shone almost all the time. They had a rainy season in November in Southern California, so that we were able to go and train without any interruption of the weather. That was not the case here. When we took off, we never knew coming back that we were going to be able to land at our base. The kind of system that we had was not what you have today. The instrument landing system was called an SCS-51, and it could bring you within, it was supposed to bring you within 50 feet of the runway. Didn't always do that because it depended on the barometric pressure being set properly. And frequently you didn't get the information correctly. Most of the time they would wake us, depending on what time the mission was due to go off, anywhere between 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning to about 5 o'clock in the morning. Somewhere between those hours, we would wake up. We knew the night before that we would be flying a mission. There was a squadron room. If there was a red board that was hung up on the outside of that building, it meant stand by. Can't leave the base because you might be on a mission. If there was a green board up, you were ready for a mission the following day. In which case you would go into the office, look at the board, and they would hang the name of the pilot of each crew underneath that board and the position that you were going to be in the formation. The board looked like any one of these three. These three represented 3 squadrons. This is one squadron, that's another, that's a third. And when you look at these, each is a squadron, and there were 12 planes that flew in elements of 3. 3 planes here, 3 planes here, 3 planes here, 3 planes here. They were at various heights. One plane would be in the center, one would be a little lower, one would be a little higher, and the fourth was much lower. 12. Sometimes there were 13 when there was a spare that came along who would just fill in case somebody dropped out for any reason. And on this chart, it shows them. The top one here was the 849th Squadron. I know that because it was being led by Major Adams. His name is on here. We'd get up and go to the mess hall and eventually arrive at a briefing room where they had something like this that would have the target underneath it. And we wouldn't see what the target was until the leader of that mission would come down and pull open the curtain. You had a drawstring that opened it this way, and you would see what the target was. And if it was something like Berlin or Merseburg or any of the deep penetrations, you would hear all the group going, oh. And if it was what we would call a milk run, something close in Holland, outside of Holland, or things like that, and there weren't very many of those, you'd get an ah. Dressing was not easy because the temperature above England at 24,000 feet is 60 degrees below zero. And the planes that we had were not insulated. And the windows were open on the side for the gunners to shoot, be shooting with. And we had to put on 5 layers of clothing. In the beginning, when the crews that came before us first began to experience how to dress, many were disabled by frostbite, and there were more casualties to frostbite than there were to enemy action, at least in the beginning of the war and halfway through it. We had to put on long underwear of silk, cotton, and then wool and a heated unit, and then sheepskin with leather on the outside and sheepskin on the inside. But we would dress, change, eat, and then get into transportation that would take us to the briefing room, where we would be briefed on a mission. Then we go out to our planes, and we would take off in formation behind each other.
They took off from here. They went to Yarmouth. They come back to Norwich. And then they come back here. And they picked up all the squadron. And not only the squadron, there was Thorpe Abbotts, Horham, and Parham, which is the other side of Framlingham, and that was called the 13th Air Division, and they all went together. Brome, Mendlesham, and one other, and I can't think what other. Debich, that's it, and they were another group, and they all went together. And they used to circle, and we were watching them circle, and we see 2 aeroplanes, and I said, God, look at them, they're close, and they collided in midair. And one of the planes went down, which you couldn't watch both of them, if you understand what I mean, and this one plane had lost a wing, a full wing, and full loaded with bombs and ammunition and men, and it was spiralling down like that with one wing. And we counted 10 people jump out of there in their parachute. So they all got out of the aeroplane because that didn't break up. And one of them pilots landed in Oakley, right behind my auntie's house. And they come along in a Jeep, put him in a Jeep and took him.
When you're 20 years old and you come here, and you start flying, you really think that you are immortal. You have no thought that someday maybe you would die. And so during the first few missions, it was nothing. You went out and you flew, and then you'd see a plane going down in flames or falling apart with a wing coming off, and knowing that there are people in there that's spinning around that are going to hit the ground any minute. Or seeing people bailing out of planes into Germany, where they would be either captured or killed and prisoners of war.
One of the planes crashed, right in the River Dove actually. All the bombs came out and exploded. Of the 3 of the crew, there was 10 in each crew. There were only 3 got out alive, and that was one of the planes blew to bits, and the bits of the plane was in Hoxton, Eye, and Brome.
2 aeroplanes collided, and they went down in the Dove River, just beyond where the castle is. And they were buried in the river, the aeroplanes, and I expect you'll find there's some still there now. And a lot of, well, no one got out of them.
I once was in the town when a German bomber came over, a Dornier bomber, and we were told to lay on the floor as soon as you hear the siren go. We had a siren going there. So I chucked myself on the floor and looked up, and this German Dornier bomber was so low that I could see the bombs dropping from the aircraft, and none of them exploded because it was only about 100 feet high, so you had to be a certain height for those to explode. Then I think it was shot down by one of our fighters somewhere in Norfolk.
We trained with 10 members of the crew. And but when we came here, they said, you don't need 10. The radio operator will be the ninth, would be the seventh gunner. There were 9 gunners on the plane. 2 were in the nose, the navigator and the bombardier were gunners. The top turret gunner, the ball turret gunner. 2 waist gunners. Instead of having an extra waist gunner, the radio operator became the other waist gunner, and we gave up 1 crew member. And then, of course, there was a tail gunner and a ball turret gunner.
The Germans came along and bombed a searchlight which was about a mile from our house. And that come over at 7 o'clock in the morning, and whether that was coming over or going back, I don't know, but that dropped these bombs. And we were then at junior school, that was before we got here, so that was sort of earlier on. And we went down to the bomb crater in that evening, and I mean, that was huge, the crater. You just, well, to us, it was a massive hole in the ground where this bomb had gone down, and that was at 7 o'clock in the morning, and we lived at Oakley, and this was about a mile from our house. And we'd got a big oak beam across in our kitchen, and there was a hook on the ceiling, on this beam, and that was where Mother used to keep the eggs and the butter and everything, because there weren't fridges in them days. And this basket, what was in there, was going like this here from the blast from them bombs.
In there was no electric lamps around the town. They were all gas lamps. And soon as war was declared, we all had to wear a gas mask. Every child had a gas mask.
And we were always told that if the air raid siren went, when we were walking to school, if the air raid siren went and we were near a home, we had to run home. But if we were near the school, we had to run to school. But we never did get to school wherever the siren went. We always went home.
The lead planes had bomb sights, and when they dropped their bombs, we dropped ours. So we didn't need a bombardier, and he was put onto a lead plane. The most dangerous place in the formation was the lead plane. And my bombardier was on his 3rd mission when he was shot down and spent the war in a prison camp. And I had a friend, another friend who was a bombardier, and my bombardier flew about 12 missions with me before he went to lead. I had another friend who flew 13 missions with his crew and no problems. And was shot down on his 1st mission in lead. And I'll tell you something about him. He's still alive. He had 2 brothers who were all friends of mine, and they are Jewish. When he was shot, when his plane was shot down, he parachuted and broke an ankle on landing. A Nazi doctor came in and set his leg at an angle so that he would be a cripple for the rest of his life. Another German doctor came by doing inspections of that prison camp and saw this leg and said, "What is this? What is das?" And he told David, "We're going to have to fix this." And he broke the leg, straightened it out, reset it, and David walks normally now. And that doctor wrote to David after the war that he was being investigated by the War Crimes Commission that existed right after World War II. And would David write a letter about his experience? And they remained friends for the rest of their lives. I mean, David's still alive, but that other doctor died. So there was a German doctor there who did the right thing.
If you're living here, you realise they're coming back. Some of them are shot up, other ones will come back whole, you know. But in those early days, the Luftwaffe had command of the air. There was a flying fortress. It didn't actually come from Brome. It came from one of the other airfields. And as it had shot up, it was all shot up by German fighters. And as it came into land up here towards Brome, it crashed, and there were some chaps working on the road. And as it came in, they were with a horse, because they used horses in those days. And as it came in, all shot up, it hit the horse, took the head of the horse off, and killed the two chaps that were actually working on the road.
The officers were a pilot, co-pilot, bombardier, and navigator. All of the rest were enlisted men. And in a Quonset hut, you had 3 crews, 12 men in that hut. And sometimes you'd come back, and as you came back to your Quonset hut, you would look across your bed, your cot, really, they were, because that's what they were, and see the other cots folded up, folded in half. The mattress was folded in half. All their clothing was gone, and you knew that that crew that you were sharing a Quonset hut with was gone. Whether they were killed or they were prisoners of war or what had happened to them, you don't know, but you knew it was bad. And there was a sadness that continued for days until a new crew came in. And then you didn't make friends with that crew because you didn't want close friends, because you might lose them the way you lost the ones before. And you become scared. And from that moment on, you're scared the entire time that you're here, unless you've gone to town or something like that, maybe for a few minutes. But the only time you weren't scared, or at least I wasn't, was when we were flying. As soon as we got to the plane, we were doing what we were trained to do. And it was automatic, and there was no fear at all. But when the plane landed, and I got off the plane, my knees would buckle. I would be shaking, and so would the other members of the crew. Some would be throwing up, you know. And you stayed scared after that. You went to debriefing, you came off, the Red Cross was there to give you donuts and coffee. You went in the debriefing, they gave you a shot of whiskey to get you to talk a little more freely, I think, and calm down. But it was scary. And there were a great many who didn't make it. You know, the 8th Air Force had a higher percentage of losses than any other branch of the service. Hundreds of thousands were killed or wounded.
I used to go up to the base very often, and in those days my mother used to do the washing. They didn't have a laundry at that time, and she used to do the washing. So I used to go up there, and I had a pram, and I cut the pram in half to put the washing in. And so I said, and my mother and grandmother actually used to do the washing, then I would take it back. But they were always, they wanted to do the cook's washing, not the flying chaps. And the cook's washing was that much dirtier than any of the others. But having said that, when I came back with my washing from the air base in my pram, underneath the washing was a big cheese or tins of fruit or something like that they'd given me. So that's something that I can remember quite well.
I put these trousers on specially today for one reason and one reason only. Can you see that pocket there? That pocket. Well, all the Americans, when they went flying, they had this, what they called coveralls. They're overalls to us, but they're coveralls. And because they come up here and everything. And they had that pocket, and that pocket was for their suites. And that was a box, like that big, what went in this pocket. And when we used to be up on the aerodrome, and we knew when the planes had come in, and they had to go and have their debriefing, then they all walked down from the debriefing to Brome Church, because the debriefing room was up near Strammett's, up at that end of the aerodrome. And we used to make sure that when we were coming up from school, that we'd go through there on our bikes, and we used to go slowly, and you could see if they'd got a bulge in that pocket, you knew that they had a good mission, because they didn't want the sweets. But when they had a bad mission, where they were really hassled, they would eat the gum, eat the sweets and everything. And we always used to know when they'd had a good mission, because their sweets were still in there. And we used to ask them, literally ask them, have you finished all your sweets? And they used to put their hand in the pocket, bring out the box and give it to them. That would be. And you did share them sometimes.
There was about 5 tractor drivers of us. We ploughed the airfield up, so more or less as the Americans left. I wore an American flying suit sitting on the tractor, because the tractors hadn't got cabs in those days, and the flying suits kept you very warm.
We knew they were going, and we came up, and we was on the runway, and we watched the aeroplanes go, and we stood and waved them goodbye.
There was 25 acres of aircraft that they didn't fly home with. They cut them all up under scrap bits, and it was off all the airfields. And a tremendous lot of planes there. There were German planes there, British planes, but 90% were American aircraft.